Live from San Diego, this is KUSI News.
Sean Diddy Combs will remain behind bars until his sentencing, scheduled for October 3rd. This after the music mogul was acquitted of the most serious charges against him yesterday. Criminal defense attorney Vikas Bajaj joins us now to weigh in on the verdict that was handed down and the judge's subsequent decision to keep him behind bars until sentencing. Good morning, Vic.
Good morning, Lauren.
Were you surprised by any of this yesterday?
No, I mean, the verdicts, that's a whole different conversation. But of course, once you reach too high, and sometimes when Icarus flies too close to the sun, you get burned. That may be what happened with the prosecution here. But as far as keeping him in custody, that is really because there's a presumption in the federal guidelines to keep somebody in custody post-conviction, pre-sentencing, and that's the part of the story where we're at now. So there was violence, there was threats to others, flight risk because he has so much money and ability to flee. These are the things the court considered, but primarily the evidence that the judge saw, the evidence that the judge heard about the extreme acts of violence and the threats, the arson allegations. And it's interesting because we don't know whether the jury actually said arson was not proven, therefore RICO's not proven, right? Because you need two of those acts within 10 years. But there surely was damning evidence of violence and threats and coercion towards others. And we can understand from the judge's comments, he took those to heart, he believed those, and he found him to be a threat to the community.
Right, so while it looked as though the defense is saying it was a huge victory for them, they're the dream team and all of this, I mean, the fact of the matter is he was still convicted on two charges involving prostitution, and there was the violence, so that seems to be what the judge was pointing to yesterday. I guess the big question now comes to this sentencing and whether or not he is going to receive the maximum, because a lot of legal pundits were saying, basically this boils down to probably a couple of months behind jails, not years. What is your take on what could happen with sentencing?
It could very well be a number of months, not years, but it's a real indication when the judge said, I'm not going to release you. Now, if the judge had an idea that it was in fact going to just be a couple of months, the judge may have well just released him and said, hey, you know what, we're bickering here about a couple of months, let's just let you out at your liberty and come on back, and we'll find an alternative to custody when you come back. I don't see that happening in this case, and the reason for that, Lauren, is, again, the violence, the heart-wrenching testimony from other individuals. Even those were uncharged acts. We have to understand, post-trial, a fact finder, the jury, has a decision to make, but also a judge, who's the only sole actor that can pronounce sentence, has a decision to make, and he or she can consider all of the evidence that was presented in front of that jury. So I'd be hard-pressed to believe that this judge, considering the climate that we're in, the quality and character of the evidence, is going to say, hey, you know what, you beat the bigger charges, let's minimize the punishment on the smaller ones and let you go and call it a victory. I believe he's still going to have to serve some form of custody in this case. He's looking at a maximum of 10 years per count. You have two victims. There's no indication that the jury said, hey, you know what, this was an innocent man. So I think the judge will lay down the hammer and give him some form of custody.
All right, well, we will see. And as far as, going back to the charges and the more serious charges, and a lot of people saying it was overreach by the prosecution, Icarus flying too close to the sun. Yes. Do you think this was the appropriate verdict based on the evidence you heard? Do you think that the prosecution was too far reaching with what they had in their toolbox to work with?
It was the proper verdict, and we know that because that's what the jury told us. Okay, so they listen to everything, they see everything. Now, this is also a message to the Department of Justice, who sometimes feels so emboldened because of all the power and unlimited resources they have. I'd be hard-pressed to believe that there is unanimity in the Department of Justice saying, hey, we're going to get a conviction here. This was a stretch. The RICO statute came about in the 1980s to attack real organized crime. You have a leader, you have commanders, you have underbosses. In this case, the flow chart was escorts and masseuses and people who were supplying some forms of narcotics for parties. And you had, at the end of the day, adult victims, which I think really went straight to the heart of whether there was consent or coercion in this case. So I think it was a stretch by all measures, and I think the jury told us that they made the right decision in this case, and the Department of Justice nationwide, I'm sure, is in shock and thinking to themselves, let's not get too creative with our charging documents. Let's stick to the facts and the law.
All right. Well said. Thank you, Vic. Appreciate it. And, we'll see what happens in October.
Thank you, Lauren. My pleasure.
Absolutely.